Steve Harvey had facilitated countless emotional moments during his tenure hosting Family Feud, witnessing families celebrate victories, reconcile differences, and create memories that would last for generations. However, nothing in his 12 years of experience could have prepared him for the raw, unfiltered confession that would unfold on that December afternoon in 2024. What began as a standard game show taping would transform into one of the most emotionally devastating and ultimately redemptive moments in television history, proving that sometimes the path to healing requires the courage to acknowledge our deepest failures in front of the world. Before we explore this powerful story about fatherhood, regret, and the possibility of redemption, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to our channel. Stories like this remind us that it is never too late to tell the truth and seek forgiveness, even when that truth is painful to acknowledge. The Coleman family from Nashville, Tennessee, had advanced through the preliminary rounds and now stood on the Family Feud stage preparing for the fast money round. The family dynamic was immediately apparent to anyone observing closely. James Coleman was 58 years old, a successful contractor who had built a thriving business over 3 decades. He carried himself with the weathered dignity of someone who had worked with his hands his entire life, his calloused fingers and sun-darkened skin testament to years spent on construction sites. Standing beside him was his daughter, Rachel Coleman, who was 32 years old and worked as a social worker specializing in family reunification services. The physical resemblance between father and daughter was striking, both sharing the same dark eyes and determined jawline, but there was an emotional distance between them that was palpable even to casual observers. The remaining family members included James's wife of 35 years, Susan Coleman, their younger son David, who was 28 and worked in his father's construction business, and Rachel's husband Michael. Family had performed adequately during the main game, though there had been moments of visible tension, particularly when James and Rachel were required to interact directly. They had won their match and now prepared for the fast money round, the opportunity to compete for the $20,000 prize that could significantly impact any family's financial situation. What the audience and production crew could not have known was the complicated and painful history that existed between James and Rachel. 20 years earlier, when Rachel was 12 years old, her mother Susan had been diagnosed with breast cancer. The diagnosis had devastated the family, requiring extensive treatment including chemotherapy, radiation, and eventually a double mastectomy. During the 2 years of Susan's treatment and recovery, the family had faced not only the emotional trauma of potentially losing a wife and mother, but also severe financial strain as medical bills accumulated despite their insurance coverage. James had responded to this crisis by working longer hours, taking on additional contracts, and essentially disappearing into his work as a coping mechanism for the fear and helplessness he felt watching his wife battle a life-threatening illness. During those critical 2 years, 12-year-old Rachel had effectively become the primary caregiver for her mother. She had learned to manage Susan's medication schedule, had accompanied her to treatment appointments when James was working, had prepared meals for the family, and had essentially sacrificed her childhood to hold the household together. Her younger brother David, only 8 years old at the time, had been too young to understand the full gravity of the situation or to provide meaningful assistance. Rachel had borne the weight of responsibility alone, watching her father choose work over presence, choosing avoidance over engagement with the family crisis unfolding in their home. Susan had eventually recovered, her cancer entering remission where it had remained for the past 18 years. However, the damage to Rachel's relationship with her father had proven far more difficult to heal than Susan's physical recovery. Rachel had grown up feeling abandoned by James during the period when she had needed a father most desperately. She had internalized the message that work and financial provision were more important than emotional presence and support. As she entered adulthood, Rachel had chosen a career in social work specifically because of her childhood experience, dedicating herself to helping families stay connected during crises rather than fracturing under pressure the way her own family had. The relationship between Rachel and James had remained cordial but distant for 2 decades. They attended family gatherings, exchanged pleasantries, and maintained the appearance of a functional father-daughter relationship. However, there had been no real emotional intimacy between them since Rachel was 12 years old. James had never acknowledged his absence during Susan's illness, had never apologized for leaving his young daughter to carry burdens no child should bear, and Rachel had never confronted him about the lasting impact his choices had on her life and their relationship. The pain had simply been buried beneath years of polite avoidance, festering quietly while everyone pretended not to notice the wound. The Family Feud appearance had been Susan's idea, proposed 6 months earlier as a way to create a positive family memory. Susan had observed the distance between her husband and daughter for 20 years, had watched them interact with careful politeness while avoiding any genuine emotional connection, and had hoped that participating in something fun and lighthearted together might begin to bridge the gap between them. Rachel had agreed reluctantly, wanting to please her mother and recognizing that Susan deserved to have her family united for this experience. James had agreed immediately, never one to deny his wife anything she requested, though he seemed oblivious to the deeper purpose Susan had in mind for the activity. The family had completed their main game successfully, and Steve Harvey now asked which family members would participate in the fast money round. James immediately volunteered to go first, stepping up to the podium with the quiet confidence of someone accustomed to taking charge in any situation. He completed his round competently, scoring 136 points. It was a respectable performance, and he returned to his family looking satisfied with his contribution. Steve Harvey then asked who would take the second turn, and after a brief moment of silence, Rachel stepped forward. As Rachel walked toward the podium, Steve Harvey began his standard encouraging speech about the family being close to their goal and needing only 64 more points to win the $20,000. However, before Steve could place the headphones on Rachel for her fast money round, James spoke up from where he stood with the rest of the family. His voice carried clearly across the studio, though it trembled slightly with an emotion that no one could quite identify. "Steve, before Rachel plays, I need to say something. I need to say something I should have said 20 years ago." The studio fell silent, the audience sensing that something significant was about to occur. Steve Harvey paused, his hand still holding the headphones, and turned to face James with a questioning expression. Rachel stood frozen at the podium, her back to her father, her entire body suddenly rigid with tension. James took a deep breath, and when he spoke again, his voice cracked with barely suppressed emotion. "Rachel, you were 12 years old when your mother got cancer. You were just a child, and I left you alone to handle everything while I hid at work because I was too much of a coward to face what was happening to our family." The audience reaction was immediate, a collective intake of breath as they began to understand they were witnessing something far more significant than a game show moment. Rachel slowly turned to face her father, her expression a mixture of shock and something that might have been hope. James continued, tears now visible on his weathered face. "I told myself I was doing the right thing by working more hours to pay the medical bills. I convinced myself that providing financially was how a father protects his family. But the truth is, I was terrified of losing your mother, and I did not know how to handle that fear, so I ran away from it. I ran away from all of you. And in the process, I left my 12-year-old daughter to be the adult I should have been." Steve Harvey stood completely still, his usual animated presence subdued by the gravity of what was unfolding. The cameras captured every moment, the raw emotion on James's face, the tears beginning to stream down Rachel's cheeks, the way Susan reached for her husband's hand in support even as her own tears fell. James kept speaking, his words tumbling out as though a dam had finally broken after 20 years of holding back. "You learned to give your mother her medications. You went to her chemotherapy appointments. You held her hair when she was sick from the treatments. You cooked dinners for the family. You did all of this at 12 years old while I was working on construction sites, pretending that hammering nails was more important than being there for my family." Rachel's professional composure, the carefully constructed emotional walls she had built over 2 decades, began to crumble visibly. She pressed her hand to her mouth, trying to maintain control, but the tears flowed freely down her face. James took several steps toward his daughter, his own tears falling unchecked. "I have watched you for 20 years becoming this incredible woman who helps other families stay together during their worst moments. I have watched you dedicate your life to making sure other children do not have to carry the burdens you carried. And every single time I see you at work, every time I hear about another family you have helped, I am reminded that you learned those skills because I failed you when you needed me most." The studio audience was completely silent except for the sound of people crying, moved by the raw honesty of James's confession. Steve Harvey's own eyes glistened with unshed tears as he watched the scene unfold. James continued, his voice breaking repeatedly as he forced himself to say the words he had avoided for 2 decades. "You needed your father, and I was not there. You needed someone to tell you that it was going to be okay, that your mother would survive, that you did not have to be so scared and brave all by yourself. You needed someone to take care of you while you were taking care of everyone else, and I failed you completely. Rachel stood trembling at the podium, 20 years of suppressed pain and anger and grief rising to the surface all at once. When she finally found her voice, it was barely above a whisper, but the microphone captured every word. Do you have any idea how scared I was? I was 12 years old and I thought my mother was going to die, and you were never home. I would wake up in the middle of the night and go check to make sure Mom was still breathing, because I was terrified she would die in her sleep, and no one would know because you were not there. James's face contorted with pain at his daughter's words, but he did not look away or attempt to defend himself. Rachel continued, her voice growing stronger even as the tears continued to fall. I forgave you years ago for not being there, Dad. I understood that you were scared and did not know how to cope with what was happening. But what I could not forgive, what has hurt me every single day for 20 years, is that you never acknowledged it. You never said you were sorry. You never admitted that you left me alone to handle something no child should have to handle. You just acted like those 2 years never happened, like I did not spend my entire adolescence being an adult so that you did not have to be. The audience was openly weeping now, many people reaching for tissues or embracing the strangers sitting beside them. Steve Harvey had tears running down his own face, making no attempt to hide or suppress his emotional response to what he was witnessing. James crossed the remaining distance to his daughter, stopping just in front of her at the podium. You are right about everything. I was a coward. I was selfish. I prioritized my own emotional comfort over your childhood. And then I was too ashamed to admit what I had done, so I pretended it never happened. I convinced myself that if we did not talk about it, eventually it would not matter anymore. But it did matter. It has always mattered. And my silence, my refusal to acknowledge what you went through because of my failures, that made everything worse. Rachel looked at her father, seeing perhaps for the first time the genuine remorse and self-awareness that had been hidden behind 20 years of avoidance. James placed his hands gently on his daughter's shoulders, looking directly into her eyes as he spoke the words she had needed to hear since she was 12 years old. Rachel, I am so sorry. I am sorry for leaving you alone when you were just a child. I am sorry for making you grow up too fast. I am sorry for taking your childhood away from you. I am sorry for never saying these words before now. And I am sorry that it took standing on a stage in front of millions of people for me to finally have the courage to tell you the truth. The dam broke completely for Rachel, and she collapsed forward into her father's arms, sobbing with the kind of deep, wrenching grief that comes from finally releasing pain that has been carried for decades. James held his daughter tightly, his own body shaking with sobs as 20 years of unexpressed emotion poured out of both of them. Susan joined them, wrapping her arms around both her husband and daughter, creating a family embrace that represented the beginning of genuine healing rather than superficial reconciliation. Steve Harvey stood watching the scene, tears streaming down his face, making no attempt to maintain the professional distance typically expected of a game show host. The audience remained completely silent except for the sounds of crying, bearing witness to something profoundly intimate and transformative. After several minutes, when the initial wave of emotion had subsided slightly, Steve approached the family gently. His voice was thick with feeling when he spoke. I have been doing this show for 12 years. I have seen families win money, celebrate victories, and create happy memories. But I have never witnessed anything like what just happened here. What you just did, James, that took more courage than most men will ever have to show in their entire lives. James pulled back slightly from embracing his daughter but kept one arm around her shoulders, as though afraid that letting go completely might cause her to disappear. Steve continued speaking, addressing James directly. You stood up here in front of millions of people and admitted your failures as a father. You did not make excuses. You did not minimize what you did. You did not try to justify your choices. You took full responsibility for the pain you caused your daughter. That is the kind of accountability that most people cannot manage in the privacy of their own homes, let alone on national television. Steve turned his attention to Rachel, speaking with gentle compassion. Rachel, what you have been carrying for 20 years, that weight of being forced to be an adult when you were still a child, that is a burden no one should have to bear alone. Your father is right that you should never have had to take care of your mother and your family the way you did at 12 years old. But the fact that you took that painful experience and turned it into a career helping other families, that shows incredible strength and character. He addressed both of them together, his words carrying the weight of someone who understood the significance of the moment they were experiencing. What happened here today is not the end of your healing process. This confession, this acknowledgement of truth, this is just the beginning. You have 20 years of pain to work through, conversations to have, trust to rebuild. But you cannot heal from wounds that have never been acknowledged, and today, those wounds have finally been brought into the light where healing can begin. Steve then made a decision that would later be described as one of the most compassionate interventions in game show history. Rachel, you still have a fast money round to play, but before you do, I want to ask you something. Do you want to continue right now, or do you need some time to process what just happened? There is no wrong answer. We can take a break, we can reschedule, or we can keep going. This is your choice. Rachel wiped her tears and looked at her father, then at Steve, then at her mother, who was still standing beside them both. When she spoke, her voice was stronger than it had been moments before. I want to play, Mr. Harvey. My father just gave me something I have needed for 20 years. He gave me acknowledgement, validation, and a genuine apology. That is worth more than any amount of money. But I also want to show him that I am strong, that even though he was not there when I needed him, I survived and I thrived. I want to win this money for our family, and I want him to see that I can do it. Steve smiled through his tears and nodded with evident respect. All right then, Rachel, let us do this. The fast money round proceeded, and what happened next seemed almost symbolic of the transformation that had just occurred. Rachel answered each question with remarkable clarity and confidence, her responses hitting number 1 answers on 4 out of 5 questions. She scored 172 points on her own, bringing the family total to 308 points. The audience erupted in a standing ovation that lasted several minutes, celebrating not just the victory but the emotional breakthrough they had witnessed. Steve Harvey embraced Rachel, then James, then the entire Coleman family together. When he finally addressed the cameras, his voice still heavy with emotion, he delivered a message that would be replayed millions of times in the days and weeks that followed. Ladies and gentlemen, we just witnessed something that goes beyond entertainment or game shows or prizes. We witnessed a father finding the courage to acknowledge his failures, a daughter finding the strength to accept that acknowledgement, and a family taking the first real steps toward genuine healing after 20 years of unspoken pain. He continued, speaking directly to viewers watching at home. If you are a parent who has made mistakes, who has failed your children in ways you are too ashamed to admit, let James Coleman's courage inspire you. It is never too late to tell the truth, to apologize sincerely, and to take responsibility for the harm you have caused. Your children need to hear you acknowledge what happened, even if it happened decades ago. The wounds do not heal simply because time passes. They heal when truth is spoken and accountability is taken. Steve turned his attention to adult children carrying pain from childhood. And if you are someone who was hurt by a parent's failures, someone who had to grow up too fast or carry burdens no child should carry, I want you to know that your pain is valid. You deserved better than what you received. But if your parent genuinely acknowledges what they did and takes real responsibility without excuses or justifications, consider whether you might be willing to begin the process of forgiveness. Not because they deserve it, but because carrying that pain for your entire life only hurts you. The episode aired 3 weeks later and immediately became the most watched Family Feud episode in the show's history. The clip of James's confession went viral within hours, generating over 50 million views in the first 72 hours alone. The response was overwhelming and deeply emotional. Thousands of adult children shared stories of their own parents' failures and the lasting impact of never receiving acknowledgement or apology. Thousands of parents shared their own regrets and the courage James had inspired in them to finally have difficult conversations with their adult children. Mental health professionals and family therapists praised the episode for demonstrating the importance of parental accountability in healing family relationships. Articles were written in psychology journals about the power of genuine apology and the difference between superficial reconciliation and authentic healing. Parenting organizations used the episode as a teaching tool about the long-term impact of parental absence during childhood crises and the importance of emotional presence in addition to financial provision. The Coleman family received an outpouring of support from around the world. Rachel was contacted by numerous media outlets wanting to interview her about her experience and her work in family reunification. She used this platform to discuss the prevalence of parentification in families facing crisis, where children are forced to take on adult responsibilities, and the importance of providing support services to families during medical emergencies so that children can remain children. James also received unexpected attention, with many men reaching out to express gratitude for his willingness to model vulnerable accountability. He began speaking at men's groups and father-son retreats about the dangers of using work as emotional avoidance and the importance of being emotionally present during family crises rather than simply being financial providers. Steve Harvey invited the Coleman family back for a follow-up segment 6 months after the original episode aired. The transformation in the family dynamic was immediately visible. James and Rachel stood close together, their body language reflecting genuine comfort and connection rather than the careful distance that had characterized their relationship for 2 decades. Rachel shared that she and her father had been attending family therapy together weekly since the Family Feud taping, working through the layers of pain and rebuilding their relationship on a foundation of honesty rather than avoidance. James revealed that confronting his failures as a father on national television had been the catalyst for examining other areas of his life, where he had used work and achievement to avoid dealing with difficult emotions. He had reduced his work hours significantly, had begun attending therapy individually to address his tendency toward emotional avoidance, and had completely restructured his priorities to emphasize presence and connection over productivity and financial success. The family had used the $20,000 prize money in a way that reflected their transformed values. They had donated half to a nonprofit organization that provided support services to families dealing with childhood cancer, specifically funding programs that helped prevent parentification by ensuring parents had the resources and support needed to remain the adults in the household during medical crises. The remaining $10,000 had been used to fund regular family therapy sessions and to create a college scholarship in Rachel's name for students studying social work who had personal experience with parentification or childhood caregiving responsibilities. During the follow-up segment, Steve Harvey announced that his foundation had been deeply moved by the Coleman family's story and had created a new initiative focused on supporting families through medical crises. The program would provide not only financial assistance for medical bills, but also counseling services, respite care, and education about maintaining healthy family dynamics during extended illness. The program would be called the Coleman Family Initiative, honoring the courage both James and Rachel had shown in confronting their painful history and choosing healing over continued avoidance. Rachel's response during the follow-up segment captured the profound change that had occurred in her relationship with her father. 6 months ago, I stood on this stage and heard my father apologize for something that happened 20 years ago. I had convinced myself that I did not need that apology anymore, that I had moved past the pain and built a good life despite what happened. But the moment he finally acknowledged the truth, I realized how much I had been carrying all those years. The weight I did not even know I was carrying finally lifted. She continued, her father standing beside her with his arm around her shoulders in a gesture that would have been unthinkable 6 months earlier. My father did not just apologize that day. He took full responsibility without making any excuses or trying to minimize what happened. That is what made his apology meaningful, and in the months since, he has proven through his actions that he meant what he said. He has shown up for therapy every single week. He has done the hard work of examining why he made the choices he made. He has listened when I needed to express anger or pain without getting defensive. That is real change, and that is what has allowed me to truly forgive him. James added his own perspective, speaking directly to fathers watching who might be carrying similar regrets. I wasted 20 years being too proud and too ashamed to admit I had failed my daughter. I convinced myself that if we did not talk about it, eventually it would not matter. But silence does not heal wounds. It just allows them to fester. If you have hurt your children, if you have failed them in ways you are too embarrassed to acknowledge, I am telling you that your silence is hurting them more than your apology ever could. It is never too late to tell the truth and take responsibility for your failures. 3 years after the original episode, the Coleman family's story continued to inspire conversations about parenting, accountability, and healing. Rachel had published a book titled When Children Become Parents, Healing from Parentification, which became required reading in many social work programs and therapy training courses. The book included a detailed account of her experience on Family Feud and the subsequent healing process with her father, offering it as a case study in the power of genuine accountability and forgiveness. James had become an unexpected advocate for emotional literacy in men, speaking regularly about his journey from emotional avoidance to genuine presence. He had also transformed his construction business, implementing policies that encouraged employees to prioritize family during crises rather than using work as escape, and providing paid family medical leave that exceeded legal requirements. The relationship between Rachel and her father had evolved into something neither of them could have imagined during those 20 years of distance. They spoke regularly, attended family events together with genuine enjoyment rather than obligation, and had developed the kind of authentic connection that can only come from working through pain honestly rather than avoiding it indefinitely. Before we conclude this powerful story about fatherhood, failure, and the possibility of redemption through honest accountability, please remember to like this video and subscribe to our channel. James Coleman's courage in admitting his failures and Rachel's strength in accepting his apology remind us that healing is possible when we choose truth over comfortable silence. Your subscription helps us continue sharing these transformative stories that challenge us to be better parents, better children, and better human beings willing to acknowledge our failures and do the hard work of genuine change. The story of the Coleman family and their Family Feud appearance transcended its origins as a shocking television moment to become a cultural reference point about parental accountability and the long-term impact of childhood experiences. It demonstrated that genuine apology requires taking full responsibility without excuses, that forgiveness is a process rather than a single decision, and that it is never too late to begin healing relationships damaged by years of avoidance and unspoken pain. James's willingness to be vulnerable on national television and Rachel's courage in accepting that vulnerability created a blueprint for how families might begin to address and heal from painful histories. Their story continues to inspire difficult conversations in living rooms across the world, giving people permission to finally speak truths that have been buried for years, and to believe that authentic healing is possible when we choose courage over comfort and honesty over preservation of pride.